Meanwhile, Fed Vice Chair Richard Clarida is set to speak here in New York at the Council on Foreign Relations, and our own Steve Liesman joins us right now with the details about what to expect. What's going on?
Good morning, Andrew. The Fed Vice Chair, Richard Clarida, saying the current stance of monetary policy, quote, likely to remain appropriate. He says it's not on a preset course, but it would take a lot to change the current stance of policy. He says the U.S. economy begins, going back to your just recent conversation, begins 2020, quote, in a good place. Specifically, he says there's no evidence that the strong labor market we've had is pushing up inflation, but wages going up and pushing up prices. No evidence of that. Also, interestingly, he says the global headwinds that caused the Fed to reduce rates in 2019 may be beginning to ease, seeing some evidence of that, he says. The shift in monetary policy in 2019, Clarida calls, quote, well-timed and help keep the outlook on track. And the Fed is ready to adjust the balance sheet, in other words, its purchases of repos and those sort of things, as appropriate. The Fed may move away from active repo operations gradually later this year, but nothing definitive on that. So he's the main guy on monetary policy that you want to listen to for changes, and we're not seeing much change. This idea of the Fed being on hold. The two most interesting things I thought were this idea that these global headwinds may be beginning to ease.
That was what I was going to say, too. I mean, if I had to take anything away from this, he sounds like any concerns about the economy are kind of easing at this point. So the idea that they would ease further, forget about that, at least for now, unless the situation changes. I
think the Fed positioned itself for maybe not the situation with Iran, but certainly for the trade situation to get worse. And that gets back, if I might, to the question that I asked the Fed chair back in at the recent press conference, where I said, okay, you pointed us to this paradigm of 1998, where you cut rates as insurance. Well, Mr. Chairman, in 1998, you took them back.
Yeah.
Are you taking these back? And he said, no, the situation is different. So even though the headwinds are easing, it should not, at least given the framework that the chairman laid out, create the concern that the Fed's going to take those cuts back.
Now, I'm sure he wrote this speech before this morning, but it's interesting to note that this morning is when we find out that China is saying, yes, we will be there to sign the trade deal, phase one of the trade deal with the United States.
Right.
That's going to be happening on the 15th. And if that was the one thing the Fed was positioning itself for things to get worse, we find out today that at least that's not the view this morning, which is why the futures are up so significantly.
I think that's true, but now I get to use a little bit of the reporting that I did over the weekend in San Diego at the American Economic Association annual conference.
Where else would he have been?
Where else would I have been? 13,000 other economists. I was there as a reporter. Let me.
Did you have a fishing rod with you?
I did not, Joe, and that was a mistake I made. You are correct. I should have.
Trying to write off another trip to reporting.
Do you know that I bought a 7-piece rod that fits in my overnight bag? I've got 2 of them, a 9-weight and a 4-weight, but we can talk about that separately. It's allowed me to do additional fishing with my reporting trips. This time I did not fish, but I did report 2 things. First of all is that the president is only not putting on those December tariffs. The September tariffs remain in place, and in general, there were several papers presented suggesting that both the existing tariffs had a negative effect both on employment and on overall growth. And one way to think about this, Becky, we began 2019 with an expectation of 3%. Well, the administration thought 3%, but let's just say the consensus Wall Street was 2% growth at a 3% funds rate. We ended the year at a 2% growth rate with a 1.65% funds rate. So we got to where we were going, but we needed a lot more stimulus to get there. And perhaps there were many things out there. Sorry.
But no, I just want you to tell me when these overwhelming macro forces holding inflation down ease. And I don't know whether it's technology, the gig economy, Amazon, the digital revolution, the internet. Whatever you want to call it, something is different, it seems like to me. And rates got to go up eventually, but what if inflation doesn't come back, even with wage pressure? Then why should they? But I figure they got to. But you got to tell me,
Joe,
you got to tell me when this technology.
This is the big development of our time. And
that's what I think.
Apologies to the guy, but not only just the inflation, but the change in the Fed. The Fed is no longer believing what you just said, which is that we have to go back.
I know.